On my far left, we have John Raviv from Citi. He's a senior equity analyst. He's one of the top analysts by far in the sector and has spent a lot of time looking at demand and new business models, particularly in business aviation. Next to him, we have John Stack. He's the aerospace leader and managing director at the McLean Group, an investment bank. So he spends a lot of time focusing on this sector and also suppliers to aerospace companies and all aviation. He also worked for a long time at Textron or Cessna. So he's worked for an OEM, as has Tobias Strobl, who's a strategy designer at Business Models, consultancy and strategy advisory. He worked at Airbus, so he comes in it from a different perspective. So what we have here really is sort of aviation industry or aviation and aerospace industry and finance insiders. And they're going to take us through their thoughts on do only the paranoid survive, looking at how easy it is to disrupt aviation. So, first question, Tobias, how easy is it to disrupt aviation and existing market leaders?
Well, I think it's kind of, since I'm coming from a kind of corporate perspective with Airbus, and what I've seen there, and that was actually like 5 years back. At that time, that was all Airbus R&D, so like the corporate R&D. And at that time, I seen disruption, innovation. It's kind of hard since we were attached a lot to the day-to-day business. So really coming up with new creative ideas, really those disruptive ideas. At that time, it was kind of hard because we were way too focused on that day-to-day business. But I think what they did was pretty smart, having these kind of outposts as A-Cube, for instance, here as their Silicon Valley outpost, and where they can really pursue these innovative, disruptive new ideas, such as Vahana, the electric VTOL. So I think really it is kind of hard if you only consider those corporates, how to come up with disruptive ideas and do innovation. But there's a lot of good things also going on if you look at other corporates, and they think about co-innovation, doing innovation together with different companies. For instance, and we've just done a workshop a few weeks ago that was with GE Aviation in combination with Ericsson, coming up with new business models in terms of remote MRO operations. So pretty interesting, bringing together different kind of companies to do co-innovation. And I think that's going to be one of the aspects where really innovation can take place.
John?
Yeah, I mean, I think the industry would rarely consider itself to be paranoid. I think there's maybe a lot of complacency. It's a conservative industry, and so I think sort of the title here is interesting. I think from an investor standpoint, I think it's always the old adage that how do you make a small fortune in aviation? It's start with a large one, and so I think we saw some of the the tombstones yesterday in terms of some of the the startups that try to get into the space. I think that this is probably a time in aviation where there's probably the most significant interest in amount of investing going into the various segments. I think that between the corporate strategics doing investments, a huge upswing in terms of corporate VC investing. Private investors. So there certainly is a lot of activity. I think the question is going to be, sort of how do these different business models shake out? We saw a lot of eVTOLs. We can get into that a little bit more, but it's certainly an attractive time now, I think, for folks.
John, would you agree that the large OEMs are complacent, the ones you cover?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a certain complacency, and I think there's a certain inability to sort of pivot. And so if you think about innovation, even within this space, you think of I was at Cessna, and you had Embraer that was already in aviation in the regional space, and made a very thoughtful, mindful move into the business aviation space, taking a regional jet, moving it downstream, understanding the customers are requirements are different, understanding the service is different, and so it's difficult to do. But and so Cessna's response could not be to clean sheet design a $1 billion family. You just sort of have to sell on different things and then kind of move over time. So there's definitely a challenge in incumbents to pivot quickly, and that creates opportunities obviously for folks to come in and be disruptive. Not just at the jet side, but other parts of the value chain.
Yeah. So we have John S here and John R here. So we'll continue to work it that way.
And, H and no H.
Yeah, and then H and no H. And thank you, Al, also for the introduction. Al, by the way, made that slide, not me. So just to make that clear here. So they're bringing us a little, so maybe a little levity, maybe a little reality. We are ones, most of us are wearing ties here, whereas the previous panel, there were no ties to be seen. I clearly work for Citigroup, and therefore I wake up with this on. But to address the question and stopping wasting time here, Bilal, I think at the end here during the last panel mentioned something very offhand, and I think it's actually, it's something to think about, is can public companies innovate? Can they actually spend the money that's required in order to come up with the new business models or new products that are needed for the next several years, decades, millennia, whatever you want it to be, centuries, whatever you want it to be? And I think that's still a very big push and pull within the public companies that I cover. My job, I'm looking at the Lockheeds, the Boeings, the Northrop Grummans of this world. And it is a real debate within those companies. And as public company requirements get even higher and disclosure requirements get higher and demand for returns get even higher, you have to wonder what actually you're getting paid for as a public company. I know another comment from the previous panel, which I had before they said it, so I'll just take a little bit of credit, but is that public companies get paid for earnings, and a lot of private companies don't necessarily get paid for earnings. So if you're a public company, you're not going to sink $5 billion into something. If you can't see that return today, you'd rather just buy back your own shares if you think they're cheap. You'd rather pay a dividend to your shareholders if you think that's another way to generate shareholder value. So there is this push and pull. I mean, there's some large OEMs in this industry that have spent billions and billions of dollars on share repurchase and buybacks over the past decade, much to the chagrin of the engineers. At the same time, the company would say, yeah, but we're still leading the pack. We have a great portfolio. We're going to have growth out for the next 15, 20 years. I don't doubt that, but you just have to think, well, are they making the right decisions and who they're making those decisions for? So a little bit of a twist on that question, but paranoia is certainly, maybe a little healthy paranoia helps, but it's a slow-moving industry, so you don't want to be too paranoid.
Do you think it's different to other industries? And every industry, if you go to a telecoms conference, everyone goes, telecoms is different. If you go to an oil company conference, they go, oil's different. Do you actually think aviation is different to other industries? Tobias?
Well, in the end, I don't think it's that much different. Well, of course, there's regulations, and which might be harder in aviation than in telecoms, but in the end, it really is how you would think about how do we want to do innovation, and also like who to involve. And what I see a lot is it's more and more that it becomes customer-centric. So with the customer in the heart of the process, and what do actually our customers want? And with many companies, I still see in the aerospace industry, I still see that they think, well, we have a great product, or that they have in mind, but in the end, they do not care that much about what the customer finally wants. And I think that's one of the basics where also any kind of company in aviation and aerospace should go back to and really think about what is it that matters to the customer.
John S.?
I mean, I think it's not unlike any other regulated industry. You just need to understand sort of the ramifications there, and don't build a business plan that is predicated on certain events happening that are completely outside of your control. And I think we'll maybe get a little bit into that more, but I think that that certainly happened in the unmanned system space where people raise money thinking that you're going to get beyond visual line of sight a lot sooner, and that didn't materialize. And then how do you pivot and with your burn rate? And so I think you just need to understand the landscape and the regulatory environment, and build a business plan, a business model that can succeed in that, and weather the storm to get to a cash flow positive situation.
As a banker rather than investor, does that worry you, the question from the audience, where someone's saying, are we misleading investors on timelines?
Well, I mean, I think any sophisticated investor is going to be able to look at comps and look at the established players and what they've been able to accomplish. Look at technology risk, and understanding the incorporation of new novel technologies is certainly going to increase risk and extend the time horizon. I mean, I think the other thing that we didn't necessarily talk about, specific to eVTOL, is that is the pilot situation. We talked about the acute pilot shortage that's affecting all aircraft operations, but there's also a whole new are they going to be how are these pilots going to be trained, and what kind of a bottleneck does that create doing VTOLs, because besides V-22 and some others, there's not really that many folks that are actually flying VTOLs today.
John, what do you think?
Just a thought on the pilot part, and maybe we can get to this later in terms of obstacles. The pilot part, I also think, again, pilot shortages is such a big deal for this for the aviation industry. what is the career path if a lot of the conversation is about going to autonomous and unmanned? Okay, you can have a job now, but we're going to work really hard to get you out of a job within 5 or 10 years. There's a little bit of a problem to solve there, and I like my job because I don't have to answer that question. I just get to ask it. But that just keying off that pilot point, I think, is interesting.
That's only until they replace equity analysts with AI.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, I think I'm worried.
It's coming soon.
I am paranoid, okay?
John S., how do you identify, true disruptors?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, a few things. I mean, I think that you really look for focus, and I think there was, the conversation in the last panel around full stack. I mean, I tend to be a little bit more, narrowly defining it in terms of something that's unique and solving a problem, and not necessarily, solving the full solution. I think particularly in aviation, that is certainly has been a failure mode. Okay, we have a novel technology, but we need to build a flying machine and to sort of demonstrate that. That's certainly been true in UAS, and so I look for something that's sort of unique, sustainable technology, that is solving a problem, and isn't sort of a segue trying to find a transportation opportunity. And so that's kind of where I would start.
Tobias, what advice would you give to startups?
Startups, well, what I see a lot is they mainly focus on the technology that they have, and they're really convinced, and oftentimes they really do have great technology, but what I'm missing there is really that whole business model and how everything really fits together. So, as I said before, in terms of customer desirability, but also the business viability, and that's what I see a lot, that they do not think that much really how to create, deliver, and capture the value. And they're only focusing on the technology, but it's not only technology which really makes a startup really successful.
John, one of the trends we're seeing with OEMs is actually, I think we all talk about them building new aircraft and coming up with new aircraft and certification, but they're all really shifting their focus to the aftermarket, aren't they? Would you agree?
Very much so. You could say that in certain pockets of the aviation world, there are some moves towards a razor blade model. If we're not, I mean, obviously we've already been there for a long time in engines. So how does that play here is an interesting point. If your business model might not be to make any margin on the OE, but you're going to make it all on the aftermarket. But if you have to contract correctly in order to do that. But you're seeing, go back to your original question. Boeing is trying to capture a lot more aftermarket content as much as possible, to the chagrin of some of the traditional aftermarket providers. There's a dynamic there which is still playing out today. Airbus is doing the same, UTX is doing the same. So everyone is trying to grab that fat tail of value. And perhaps that's the answer to the business model question, is we might have all of these nice OE products, but if you ever can figure out how to really capture that aftermarket tail, and I understand eVTOL electric has less maintenance tail, so that might change everything, put everything on its head, but I have to imagine there's still some value in actually watching over these things and capturing everything that comes out of them. I just mentioned from a Boeing Airbus perspective, one where they put out a lot there and it comes up a lot here is data, so I'm not going to break any news. I'm an industrial analyst, so it's more interesting in the industrial world. In this room, it's not that interesting, but they're keyed in on the idea that data creates value. But again, it's step A, data, step C, value, step B, we'll figure it out.
Here's an interesting, Tobias. Do you think the oil industry is going to flex their influence to slow the emergence of energy-based technologies in aviation?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, but I mean, what I really see, and I see that for many years already, and also when I was with Airbus, whenever there was anything in terms of innovation and also in terms of propulsion, it was really all about how can we fly fully electric. And you see also some of these liquid nitrogen gas jets that are developed, but really it's all about how can we get to fully electric flight. So in the end, I think, and I'm convinced that this will be the future, that fully electric flight will be the future. So in the end, the oil industry, their influence is not that present anymore at that time.
John, flipping that question slightly, do you see the existing OEMs trying to slow the emergence of new technologies?
R or S?
Sorry?
John R or John S?
Both.
Both.
John R S.
Which one first? Yeah, okay, I'll go. Yeah, I mean, I think that I think the OEMs, certainly are embracing new technology. I think it's really a question of, the appropriate, cut-in of that technology as it relates to advanced designs and new product introductions. Obviously, being very cognizant of the impact of not meeting certification timelines and, an appropriate introduction of products. But, I think companies are generally open to new technologies, but it needs to be at the right technology readiness level to incorporate, into existing products.
It's an interesting question because the question assumes or presumes that the OEMs, and by OEMs I assume you mean Boeing, Airbus, Gulfstream, Textron Aviation. Okay, so let's assume let's define some terms. So the OEMs are the people who make airplanes. So the people who actually lift folks in the air to go from point A to point B. So the question presumes that they feel threatened by this. Now, what is this? So let's define what this is. So let's define this as this is something that we want to be able to lift people through the air from point A to point B in a lot more applications than we do today. So if I'm an OEM, I am thrilled with the idea that I want to move more people through the air than fewer people through the air than what's happening today. And I think the comment from Toyota was interesting yesterday, is that to him, whatever we're talking about here, urban mobility solutions, is closer to Toyota than it is to Boeing. So if I'm a Boeing or an Airbus or a Gulfstream, conceptually speaking, moving more people through the air is better for me. That's just more opportunity to move people through the air, because that's what I do. If I'm Toyota, I actually have to think, well, right now I move people on the ground, but now they're talking about moving people through the air. So is that actually more of a threat? Again, this is, this is a very inelegant kind of comparison, but, and I think Boeing, Airbus, and all of them should be quote unquote paranoid and active in it, but for me, if I'm thinking in their shoes, this is a great opportunity. Could be incremental growth beyond what they're already doing, especially for the large aircraft builders who don't even touch and don't really care to touch the smaller stuff for now. But if there's new technology that enables them to do that and derive value from it, then heck yeah, that's a great opportunity for them. So if you're on Boeing, maybe speed it up.
I was just going to say, I think maybe a different threat to the OEM is a successful utilization model that makes better use of the existing aircraft that are out there in the field. If that was to happen, then obviously that would slow new deliveries and things like that. And so, if someone's able to really crack the nut there, I think that would have an adverse effect in terms of OEM deliveries.
Yeah, I'll second what John S. just said. Citigroup had this lost decade of BizJet thing. We published it in 2013. We're almost at the end of it, as we like to say right now. But yeah, this idea of better utilization of assets could really bite into the demand for new aircraft. That comment's not so much about the broad urban mobility opportunity. That's more about the sort of the Airbnb-ization, if you will, of the current capacity. I try to stay away from the Uber terms. I think, as has been pointed out numerous times, it's not the most appropriate comparison.
Does anyone take this question from the audience? Who is responsible to create the support and service for the new platform? Does anyone have a...
What is this new platform?
I think you're getting too philosophical.
I know, I'm sorry.
I think we need to...
I'm a very, very stickler for definitions. No, I mean, that's the new business model. I mean, right now, as we heard in the last panel, that there is this, a large privately owned company worth X billion of dollars, depending on what they're looking at it and depending on who you're talking to, is proposing ideas, and they don't really say who's going to pay for it, who's going to own all the risk. I think the next panel is going to be very interesting in that sense, in terms of talking about who actually owns the risk and who's responsible for all of the stuff that's associated with it. I mean, right now, even right now, it's not clear who's actually responsible and who gets to derive the value from the aftermarket stream, and really what those aftermarket streams are worth. Mm-hmm. So TBD on that one. For the new platforms, for existing platforms, the OEMs would want to be responsible for that support and service because it's worth a lot of money in terms of profit.
And that was also part of the supplier negotiations, going into the advanced design and everything else. And that's why, I think a lot of the suppliers right now that are, as the cheese is being moved around in terms of the value there are balking because they made significant investments, assuming they were going to have aftermarket capture. And so, it's definitely an important part of the economic pie there.
Okay, from your perspective, you want to define what will the industry look like in 5 years' time? Who's going to be the winners? Who's going to be the losers? Do you expect to see any of the existing large OEMs struggling? a nice easy question. Go first, Tobias.
Yeah. I'll go ahead. Well, I think the big players, Airbus, Boeing, they will definitely be there, and still they're doing a lot of things the right way. And I think there will be like new players. If you look into all those eVTOLs, there will be many players, but also at some point there will be a consolidation. So not everyone, and some of them will die. And only the big ones, or the ones that have actually their business model in place and not only think, well, we have great tech, these will survive actually. And also, I think for now, a lot of these companies, they do a lot of good marketing, but in the end, what I heard a lot of talks with different people from eVTOL companies, that they say, well, we're good. These guys are good at marketing, but in the end, they might even take off vertically. But when it comes to forward flight, they're not there yet. So I think at some point, big players will still exist, but there will be also like many interesting new companies that really made the big shot.
Yeah, I mean, I think, 5 years, I don't think we're going to see a whole lot. I mean, I think that, over the next decade or 2 decades, I think you'll see, more of an advent of some of the, international players. Obviously, the Chinese, the Russians have been very active in developing some programs. The Mitsubishi Regional Jet, I mean, whether that ultimately makes an impact. But, I think you're going to see, the kind of the core folks staying there. There's obviously been a continued consolidation trend, in business jets. Hawker goes bankrupt and gets acquired by Textron. Obviously what's happened with the C series and then Boeing and Embraer. So I think there's been some continued consolidation. As it relates to the 120 or so eVTOLs, I mean, I think maybe there's one of them that remains unaffiliated if they have a visionary person that is able to attract financing that would survive as a standalone. And those that have partnered in one way, shape, or form with some sort of a strategic investor. It doesn't necessarily need to be an OEM, but have built an ecosystem around it to make it successful. Just due to the complexity that's involved with designing, certifying, servicing, supporting the infrastructure, I really think to be successful, it's going to need to be something that's effectively tied to somebody that's that's in the industry.
But do you think that's car industry or aviation industry?
I'm sorry?
Does that have to be aviation industry?
No. It could be deep pockets from outside. I mean, it could be someone from the auto industry. Someone, but it needs to be someone that has the staying power, the wherewithal. But I think from the certification standpoint, I think you're going to need to have someone there. I mean, it's hard to imagine one of these businesses standing up a manufacturing facility, going through the production certificate as a standalone. Just the carnage that's happened on the general aviation business aviation side for novel designs that didn't have the level of technology risk. It just takes a long time to design and certify airplanes, and so and I'm more of a half full sort of innovative optimist, but I think being practical, there's a lot of challenges there because things take a lot of time. You run out of money, and and then bad things happen.
The thing, so 5 years from now is 2023, 2024. On the large end of the aviation spectrum, obviously Boeing and Airbus have backlog out to those years, roughly speaking, so I don't know what big changes you're going to perceive there. To me, I think the biggest change that you might see in 5 or 10 years, and you've actually seen that change you've seen significant change on this front over the last 5 and 10 years, 15, 20 years as well, is in how you make aircraft. Again, maybe this is a high quality problem for the largest companies, but I was in Wichita at Spirit Aerosystems in late August or mid-August. I was in Seattle in early September at Boeing. And when you just look at what they're able to do in the same footprint today versus what they were doing 20, 30 years ago, they've doubled the production in the same facility. Many places, many rooms you walk into, or hangars you walk into there, are quiet. They're quiet. They're building airplanes and it's quiet in there. You don't hear a lot of people. You don't hear a lot of machines. It's very quiet. So I think that going forward, what are the big changes going to be in the aviation industry? For me, what I get excited about is how you actually build the airplane. What that means for where venture capital money should go. That was the previous panel's sort of job to figure that out, but to me, that's a really big change that's going on right now. It's something that the OEs are very excited about right now. You heard it from GE yesterday. I mean, these are revolutionary changes going on beneath the surface. So while the airplane doesn't look different, it's being built very differently. And that has all sorts of implications in terms of who pays for what and what consumers pay for the end product, and also the ability to stimulate demand as well. I mean, I think the previous panel gentleman said it very quickly, rightly. Find the thing that takes the most cost out. These manufacturing technologies take a lot of cost out.
Well, I think one interesting thing is we all get very het up on certification. But if you look at the business aviation graveyard, there's a lot of business model companies here. But there's also a lot of manufacturers that got an aircraft certificated. So like the Hawker 4000, but they lost money on every one they built. Do you think we're not focusing enough on the production and the support stage of the industry?
Well, John S., I'm sure, has thoughts about Hawker 4000. But I would just say that sometimes you don't want to over-engineer something, so I don't know if that was so much you don't want to over-spec something. There's a reality of what you actually have to provide, and sometimes the 80% solution that's less expensive is much better than the 100% exquisite solution that just costs you a lot more and can bankrupt your company. I mean, in Hawker's position, there are other things happening, but obviously the 4000 did not help.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question of technology, integration and adoption. I mean, bringing composite airplanes in, is certainly not easy. And, I think that, the certification process dragged out quite some time. And the same thing could be said for the Lear 85 at Bombardier, significant spend there and then pulling the plug on it. And then the one that, that I don't see there is obviously Eclipse Aviation. $1.3 billion was talked about yesterday as well. I mean, a lot of interesting innovation, both in terms of, the airframe and in terms of friction stir welding and, and economies, obviously trying to build a very significant volume. And, obviously coming from outside the industry attracted a lot of capital and part of it was situational, things didn't play out, but then just on the execution side, underestimating sort of the ability to get a product certified. And so, eventually got 259 airplanes out there, and then someone's able to pick it up for $20 million. It was a pretty good purchase afterwards. So.
Do you think production gets ignored occasionally?
So, well, in terms of production, what I think there, it's really interesting how to integrate actually augmented reality, and then also beyond production, also in terms of maintenance, repair, and overall operations. And that could be really something which might change the whole field and really make it easier and also make it way less expensive. So I think these trends or technologies could be really interesting in terms of production, but also in terms of after sales and in terms of MRO operations.
Okay, I think you can each choose one question from the board. Whoever goes first.
I'll go auto. They all seem interesting. Apple. The aerospace OEMs are. I mean, I've talked to a couple of the folks on the ground there. They are more interested in as they get to higher and higher volumes. I mean, you have Airbus and Boeing building 140 narrow-body aircraft. Sorry, their ideas of building 140 narrow-body aircraft a month in the not-too-distant future among Boeing and Airbus, and that's a much higher volume proposition than what you're looking at several years ago. So there are probably some activities that they could adopt from the auto industry in terms of automation that could be applied, and they're hiring, I think, a few people from the auto industry in terms of supply chain management and also sort of like the checking process at the end. That is interesting, but always keep in mind the volume numbers are always going to be way different. And also the certification requirements are going to be way different, and also the price points you're selling at are going to be way different as well. So I took the auto one, but anyone can feel free. Who's going to take Apple?
Okay, I can go next. So in terms of how fragile is the whole vertical, the whole eVTOL scene that's going on at the moment, and well, a bad PR event, a crash or any scandal, could it have a tremendous effect? It could, but the question is, if you look at traffic in the big cities these days, in San Francisco, I just had it this morning, supposed to arrive 10 minutes from where I live here at the conference. It just took me 25 minutes in total. So I would definitely hop on any of these eVTOLs and just try it out. And there's always, at the beginning, there's always some bad PR maybe going on, and also crashes, they happen, but it's normal. And if you look at ground traffic, you also have crashes every day. So in the end, if we say one crash happens and then FAA says, okay, you're not good to fly anymore, I think that's, in my opinion, that's just too restrictive. And you just have to compare it, what happens on ground traffic and then what happens up in the air.
I'm actually more interested to know, I think the executive scandal bit's interesting, knowing that there's a lot of eVTOL senior executives in this room. I'm just wondering what they're worried about. Right.
Let's flip these lights around. Well, one thing that did not get mentioned yesterday much and not so far today, and I think is worth mentioning, and this question talked about crashes and accidents, but what about something that's not an accident, something that's done actually on purpose, that actually kills people and creates a security issue? So we talked a lot about government yesterday. We did not talk about really the Department of Homeland Security from its Homeland Protection mission. We did not talk about the Department of Defense, which is really in the business of making sure they control everything in the entire world as best as they can as possible. That's the DoD's mission, quite frankly. So I think that you also have to worry about that dimension, is that to what extent do we fully understand these technologies, to what extent can they be weaponized, and if they were, God forbid, to be weaponized, what would that do in terms of a freezing mechanism? Because all of a sudden what becomes we can figure out the certification, guys, if we just work a little bit harder, it turns into a national security issue. And national security issue is one of the sort of, that just kills. I can kill innovation in its tracks.
Yeah, I mean, I think the security, cybersecurity side of things is really important as it relates to sort of the modernization of ATC and ADSB, and what could happen there in terms of spoofing and not, and and then obviously as you talk about autonomy and integration in the airspace, I mean, it is a major issue that that will unfold. I mean, a lot of the enabling technologies are there, but that becomes a real concern for folks. Do I have to take one of these? I mean, I think from the Apple. I mean, I think that from a connectivity and everything else, there's maybe an angle there, but quite frankly, I think there's probably bigger value pools that they're interested in playing in. I mean, aviation is certainly some very interesting opportunities, but it's probably not going to be high on the radar.
Do you want to answer that one as well?
I mean, I think it's a question of resource allocation, quite frankly. I don't know that any of the OEMs are particularly, more advantageous and, in terms of, positioning to succeed in this market. I think it's a question of having the right strategy and having the conviction to pursue it, and then putting, the right internal teams, and then teaming with the right folks that are in the ecosystem, the startups and, and the more, nimble technology-oriented businesses, and putting together a winning platform. And so, I think it's just a question of intent there, whether or not you want to participate in this market, you want to do something in supersonic, or, you want to do the next large cabin business jet. It's a resource allocation.
So John S. doesn't want to offend anyone, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
He doesn't want to put off any
like,
prospective clients, I think is what he's saying.
No, and from my perspective as an equity research analyst, I have to write everything before I actually give a view on anything, and I haven't written anything on this specifically, so I don't have a view.
Well, thanks for that, wasting 30 seconds.
That's my disclaimer, yeah.
Just say no comment.
You invited me, I'm sorry.
Do we have any questions in the room, old school questions?
Yeah, we got guys with ties up here. That's like.
Okay, nice, easy question for you. Something happens, you will have to leave your existing job. I'm suggesting maybe it's an expense-related scandal. Each of you loses your job tonight. Which company that you've heard from at the conference are you going to go and apply for a job?
I think the whole corporate jet investor family is doing pretty well, so I think that's where I'm going to go.
I think we're going to do a spin-off.
To be fair, we have very lax hiring standards as well. So, anyone else?
Perfect for me. Perfect for me, Al. Thank you.
I won't name a specific business, but I think got a little bit of talk yesterday from GE. I mean, I'm very bullish on the additive space, and not just on the metal side, but also on the composite side. A lot of interesting opportunities at the OEM level in terms of sort of design and build, but also on the aftermarket side. And so there's some pretty attractive things there. And there's been a lot of sort of smaller M&A that's happened. GE's obviously bought a number of businesses. Hexcel's made an acquisition of an aerospace business. ATI picking up a business that was sort of in my backyard. And so I think there's some very interesting things. It's kind of in the early days there, but it's I think there's a nice value trajectory there for folks.
Yeah, so when it comes to me, I would say, without any name dropping, any of these eVTOL companies, that would really attire my biggest interest to start there, and looking into the business models, but also looking into the technology strategy and really make it successful.
Okay, final, each pick one very quickly. You've got 20 seconds. Actually, let's forget the first one. Basically, helicopters have huge crash numbers, but people still fly in them. I don't think that's the advertising slogan. Right, last two.
So I talked about manufacturing revolution companies. I think the interest is really on feels like it's on a B2B basis. I mean, I have a lot of Bs in here, so I don't know, you tell me. But I look at Wichita and Seattle, there's a lot of talk about electro impact and the machines that they're building to achieve what those OEs in the Seattle area and the Kansas area want to achieve. So I don't know, I feel like there is a lot of interest there, whether it's on the VC side, the small capital infusion side, I don't know.
Yeah, in terms of VTOLs, maybe a bit biased, but I think it's going to be A-cubed with Vahana. So I think, in my mind, and also what I've read and from all the talks that I have with people, I think these guys are going to be the first in the market, and also with that operational model that they have in mind.
All right, so we got a winner picked.
John, any comments?
Airbus.
Relative to, in relative to interest, I think I mentioned it earlier. I think there probably hasn't been a time in aviation where there has been so much interest in investing in various parts of the ecosystem. Again, from the strategics, the VC at the strategics, VCs, accelerators, and so I think it's certainly an exciting time here. But sort of Kenny's sort of horse race there. It's a question of how do you pick the right the horse, and I think that's probably the top one there. I'm not sure which one's going to be first to market, but I think you need to make sure that you're doing your, on the investor side, really understanding the business plan, the business model, asking the tough questions, relative to the trajectory, the reliance on the regulatory environment opening up. Are there opportunities to generate cash, before maybe the core market opens up, whether that's internationally, doing things on the military side, and just making sure that you have a business plan that, that does have some optionality around it versus, one course that's tied purely to regulatory.